Hello.
Hello.
Oh, we're both rocking new shirts today.
I bought 4 new shirts.
Where did you buy them from? Which
Uniqlo.
e-commerce? Uniqlo. Oh no, this one's
Yeah.
Uniqlo. Yours looks better ironed than mine, though. I have to say. Is that because it's
That's
just come
because
out?
it's straight out the packet. That was pretty seamless. Bloody hell.
That was seamless. It's like you've done this before.
Yeah, I'm trying a different headset to see if the volume's better.
Okay. Well, you look a lot more call center than cool.
It's what I do for the company now.
Cool product director. Are you ready? Are you done your homework? Done your research?
Yeah, I did some. We're doing the discounting one, right?
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
And away we go. Well, hey. Hello and welcome to e-commerce matters. Rob had his arms in the air again, so hopefully the energy today will be spewing out of our microphones and our videos. BlackCurve helps e-commerce companies make pricing decisions. This is episode 3, and we're looking at how to avoid heavy discounting in a post-lockdown world. I did mention the title to my wife earlier today, and she thought more relevant would be how to avoid heavy discounting in a post-apocalyptic world. We might not look at that in today's podcast, but it's certainly crazy times. So we are looking at discounting. I'm delighted to be joined again by my co-star, Dr. Rob Horton, our product director here at BlackCurve. And without further ado, let's get stuck in. Hiya, Rob. You all right? How's it going? I went very London then, didn't I? Very, very street.
Yeah, all right, mate. All right, me on Macca. Yeah, I'm not bad. I am not bad. I'm still in Hampstead, but it's less sunny, basically. That's what's going on.
So one of the charts we're tracking is the weather to recording
exactly.
on each
we
axis.
might get more recording in because the drive for me to go out on the heath and go for a run is less and less and less if it starts raining.
So I'll get more work out of you if the weather's rubbish. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, top stuff. So shall we? I thought what we'd do is we'd look at some of the headlines first, because I think we've spoken a lot outside of this meeting and also in meetings with clients around what on earth is happening out there. And I thought it'd be good to sort of set the scene by looking at some headlines. And I've got a mix, so I'm covering all political bases, you'll be pleased to know. So we're not just making this up. I've got something from the Times, Sky News, The Guardian, and I've even gone across the pond and gone for the Wall Street Journal as well. So the one that I wanted to bring the few that I wanted to bring to your attention, we'll start with the Times. It said, shoppers set for bonanza as stores plan huge summer sales. Okay, analysts predict savings of up to 70%. That's pretty ridiculous. Pretty high, right? As retailers try to shift stock after the lockdown. So that was the Times at the end of May. We had one actually from this morning. Sky News said, coronavirus, shop prices fall at fastest rate in 14 years as retailers try to survive. And this is mainly around the non-food retailing market, if you read the article further. If we look at the Guardian, which again, this is recorded at the end of May, beginning of June. So this particular one was the end of May. Rainbow sale, high street gears up for massive post-lockdown discounts. Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of retailers are about to push the button on discounting. If we look at the Wall Street Journal, it sort of seems to echo that, right? Shoppers can expect big clearance sales this summer. Right, okay, fine. Well, we just stop buying now and wait until the discounts roll in. Is that your strategy? Well, you've already bought your oven,
I've
haven't
already
you?
bought my new shirts and my oven, and I mean, it's a really interesting one. A lot of the stuff I've seen is about excess stock, actually, which ties into it. So from the stats I saw, there's 15 billion worth of stock just sitting there, not just in warehouse, but in rail sidings, and companies are either renting land off the MOD to store it. So there's just containers and containers and containers. And I think we've gone from talking about kind of a lack of supply due to online, due to disruption in supply chain, for certain industries, this is the other side of it, where because brick and mortar primarily haven't been able to open, they haven't been able to shift stock at all. And if it's heavily seasonal, there are sales cycles it's got to fit into. There's credit, there's debt, there's all this stuff that these wheels that need to keep on turning. So I'm not surprised to see these headlines at all. I think they're kind of the stark reality of knock-on effect of the coronavirus.
I mean, are there any articles you'd particularly like to share that that sort of go against what we've just what I've just outlined?
I think not really. I didn't find any contrary points. I think the M&S rainbow sale, I think it was John Lewis or M&S, I always confuse them, but the rainbow sale was an attempt to tie it in with the NHS and key workers, which I liked, because I think we could come on here and say you don't have to discount all the rest of it, but the stark reality is that for a lot of these retailers, they have to shift stock. A lot of the articles I read were more around the logistical side of it and the kind of the pressures on these retailers. I think I read similar articles in The Guardian and then kind of like Business Insider and these kind of places, and a couple of extra podcasts that are out there, and a lot of it really is, there's two issues actually, really. It's not just there's customer experience, and we probably want to drill into that a little bit as well, because you have this issue where the brick and mortar retail is just heavily disrupted. So not only do you have an excess of supply, you've got a kind of a bottleneck around how much of that you can shift. And so obviously the quickest way for people to shift stuff is to heavily discount, I guess, traditionally.
So let's drill into that into a bit more detail then. So should we first start looking at which sectors is associated to this, right?
Yeah,
Is it cross sector? Is it just fashion? Is it a particular sector that's been more impacted than others?
Oh, well, I think the more seasonal the sector, the bigger the impact. So fashion is the key example, and probably the one that will dominate the media. But anything with a series of seasonality. I mean, we've talked about barbecues a lot, right? That's a good example of a product that only really sells at certain points of the year that you wouldn't really think about in the same way that fashion has seasons and fashion week and all the rest of it. The issue is to do with the business processes and the business operations that rest within it, right? In the I think one of the key stats I noticed in my reading was that 60% of stores pre-coronavirus operate on credit, right? So what this means is that you owe the supplier. So you take on the stock, you shift the stock, you pay the supplier back. So you're in a position where you need to sell. You could be in a position where you need to sell whatever, right? Not just about warehouse space, not just about the rest of it. Just because you owe someone money and they're gonna ask for it. So if your margins are high enough and you can discount enough, you're still making some money, and that's better than no money. What the interesting and difficult knock-on of that is, especially in something like fashion, is that impacts your ability for growth or ability for your next line, right? So if you forecast, I don't know, 40% margin, and that's going into an expansion or whatever, and you're down to 10% margin or 5% margin, that's a very different situation to me. But I do think so. I think we've tangented briefly, but like fashion is obviously going to be largely hit because they've missed spring summer, which is usually one of the biggest seasons. It's also impacted by the fact that no one's going on holiday anytime soon. So swimwear, beachwear, evening wear, all of these kind of sets are going to be hit. Anything seasonal, so anything that you do in the summer. Interestingly, some but not others. sporting goods, I imagine, are doing fine. Bikes, you mentioned in our webinar, are doing incredibly well. But then things like the exercise has been classified as essential, whereas seasonal non-essential retail, so I don't know, barbecues, or I'm struggling to think of examples. I think we'll struggle. I think it could be anyone really, because it's just like you've lost a season. Actually, it's just that depending on how seasonal your industry is, the more larger the hit, right? Can you hold the stock? Is the question.
Yeah, so I think it's certainly non-essential, non-food, really, because I suppose food is essential to,
So
but I think everybody immediately heads towards. I mean, the supermarkets have got their own problems with supply chains and organising social distancing and the cost of doing all that, right? But certainly, I think as people's purses, wallets get tightened, they're seriously thinking about what they do purchase, and therefore I think anything that is non-essential and anything that as you say is seasonal, right? I mean, holidays, okay, fine, we all go out and buy our it's not shirts, is it? You've swapped swim shorts for shirts. It's not but it's the knock-on effect of everything you do aside from that. Oh, I fancy a new I don't know, I fancy a new camera to take with me. Oh, I fancy a new, having a mind freeze, aren't we, with examples?
With you, right?
But you know what I'm talking about. It's all the knock-on effects of the situation they're in. I mean, I know certainly, there's things that I'd sort of put on the agenda. Again, I think you're going to get £1 for every time you mention Dyson on these podcasts, and I'm going to get £1 for every time I mention the great outdoors, right? So, I've certainly put a pause on some of the camping kit I was going to get, because okay, fine, I could get it, but it would just be
Surely
sitting.
You don't need any more. I feel like making you pan the camera to the right to see the boxes and boxes and boxes.
There's nothing to see here. Absolutely, there's nothing. No, it's not. I could probably set up my own camping outdoor online retailer just by what I've got to the left of me here. Okay, fine. So I think we've got a good feel of the sectors. It's a lot of the e-commerce sectors are being impacted very much so by the situation they're in, and a lot of them might have bought in areas in anticipation of an event, and while they might be doing well, their sales might be up on previous years, they're still sitting on stuff that might, for the obvious reason, they haven't managed to shift as people's buying patterns have been shifted to the other areas of their business. So it's not just this heavy discounting philosophy and heavy discounting assumption that the analysts are making is not just associated to those that are struggling. Okay.
No, it's a really good point. Actually, I think one that's often missed. I mean, I certainly hadn't thought of it till you mentioned it. Is that you're likely to get a segmentation in your inventory, right? Because we've had a fundamental shift in demand, and so for a lot of stuff that people can do at home, like baking, or what have I been doing? Yeah, I've been buying loads of cooking stuff. Actually, I have been buying lots of barbecue stuff, but not from the traditional retail, online only retailers. But that kind of stuff is probably doing quite well, as people are forced to kind of sit in their workout gear, is a good example, right? Forced to stay at home and change their lives. Whereas all the kind of the stuff that you associate with going on holiday, which you would have been stocking up on, is likely to not have been selling as well. So swimwear or cameras is a good example. The cameras is, ever since the rise of the phone, cameras have kind of dropped off a cliff anyway. But like, I don't know, snorkels or snorkeling kits, or that kind of stuff. So I think actually you've got two big questions, both related to stock in your inventory if you're an e-com person right now. How do I maintain stock and maximize revenue on the stuff that is starting to shift incredibly well? It's probably stabilizing a bit now. But how do I free up the capital, or free up the cash that I've got in stock at the lower end that's not shifting, without kind of just dumping it? and losing a load of revenue that way, or a load of profit that way.
Yeah, you don't want to sell out too cheaply, and that's a point which we will come to near the latter part of this podcast, I suppose. I think, is it just limited to one of the questions I'd like to explore is, do we feel that this is just limited to bricks and mortar retailers? Because I think certainly the articles, right, they pick up on, we're based in the UK, right? So forgive our international listeners here. You've got the Marks and Spencers of the world. You've got our Argoses, big brand names that have physical presence in locations. Is it just these retailers that are going to struggle?
It's an interesting one, because we were talking about doing a whole podcast on this kind of question, and I think it's worth doing. But my view is really that retail, like bricks and mortar, will feel it much more, because they haven't really been able to sell anything, whereas people who have some e-com presence or are purely e-com could at least start pivoting their inventory and have had time to do that, because there's still demand. Like, people are still buying this stuff, but just not as much, right? So at least you can shift some of it. And actually, because the supply has dropped, because your traditional bricks and mortar retailers aren't there, you're probably doing better as you are anyway. So it's much more accentuated for bricks and mortar. And I think it's really accentuated by your kind of, I think we're going to be talking about this a lot on all of these podcasts we do, but operational efficiency again and again and again, right? In that, like, how easy is it for you to be dynamic in your operations within your business? Like, how easy is it for you to kind of pivot how much focus you give on each different channel or storefront, and how you manage them? And if you can the easier you can do that, the better. I mean, so a big discussion in the US this week around kind of business bailouts and whether they've been more effective for large businesses versus small businesses, and all the rest of it. And really what it turned out to be, when the Fed looked into it, was that larger businesses tend to have higher operational efficiency than smaller mums and pop stores, so they could pivot more. And purely, they often had more capital and whatever. But an interesting counterexample is someone like JCPenney, which have traditionally been quite averse to technology, and they've just been absolutely hammered by it. Declared bankruptcy, I think, and restructuring and all the rest of it. So, I mean, it's clear that bricks and mortar are going to be more affected just because they haven't been able to sell non-essential bricks and mortar, I should say.
Absolutely. And I think, was it Walmart was the counter to JCPenney, because the reason that they were doing so well was because
they've been investing in a move to online. Good and lucky are often synonymous, aren't they? But like,
they didn't see into the future, but they'd had a strategic plan to
move on to online, and they've seen 70% a 70% increase in online growth. And I think there is a real opportunity there, because we're in a post-lockdown world, and actually brand loyalty and brand identity is probably more impactful to people than you'd think. Because if I order something from a brand, I know I trust it, and that matters, because I want it not to have coronavirus on it. Or do you know what I mean? It's that kind of. I don't think there's actually any difference, because a lot of the time the stock comes from the same place and goes through very similar supply chains. But that's the kind of irrational or /rational behavior. And so for someone like Walmart, who have the big brand, and you've got someone who used to shop offline, it's a natural go-to is to go to them, not to find somewhere new. So I think that there is opportunity there if you can pivot.
Comes back to market efficiency and operational efficiency, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
it does, doesn't it?
I think that's going to be our mantra. We'll have to put that on the back of our business cards and on the website, isn't it? That pricing is one part of becoming operational efficiency, and lockdown or no lockdown, you will win by getting that in place.
Exactly.
So I think, okay, we've set the scene. It's clear that retailers, bricks and mortar, and also online, whether you're doing well or not, we're probably set for a summer and into the back end of the year of experiencing prices that are going to be a lot lower than they would have been in a quote unquote normal trading environment. Okay. So is it worth looking at why are these companies discounting in the first place? Just because I think let's just bring it back for a second. So from my perspective, you know, the clear, simple reason is excess stock. Okay, it's the seasonal businesses that have excess stock that they're not going to be able to shift. So is everything anchored around that? Is there more to it than that?
There's more to it than that, because I mean, most people I know have taken a 20% pay cut, right? So it's there's less people are going to be spending less money, and they're going to be thinking more carefully about what they spend their money on. So it's kind of you're getting a hit from both sides, in that you've got a lot of stock that normally you would have sold into a market that may not even exist, especially if you're looking at kind of holiday wear or whatever. And then you've got people who, quite rightly, given what's going on and so that are worried about, well, am I going to have a job? Is my job secure? If my job's secure, do I have to take a pay cut? So people are going into this kind of saving mode, right? And reevaluating what they spend their money on. And that's a dangerous combination for a retailer. And it certainly means that prices are much more likely to go down than go up.
So it is the supply-demand trade-off, isn't it? That our
exactly.
demand's falling because individuals have less money available to them to spend. And on the flip side, these bricks and mortar and online players have excess stock. I mean, is it worth one of the articles that I read? It was Laura Tennyson, I think for the CEO of Jojo Mama and Babe, and she said we are going to try and hold our nerve as we feel the summer will last longer than it has in previous years. Is that a strategy that people should look to do? Hold their nerve?
I mean, it fundamentally depends on your business, right? I would not go out to everyone and say, hold your nerve. It depends, like, how much money you owe someone. Like, do you have creditors? Are they likely to turn up?
So is that it? You've hit an interesting point there. Sorry to interrupt, Rob. That I think cash is king, right? We always previous to this, you know, cash is king, right? And I think, you know, as pricing optimization and optimization companies, it's all too easy for us to say invest in optimization technologies to do X, Y, and Z, right? But these retailers and e-commerce companies, if cash is a real pinch point at the moment, they need to unlock the cash to invest in the next season, the next sales cycle, to release the next strategic drive. And if you've got stuff tied up and you've geared your whole operation around, you know, this period that's been thrown up in the air, you've got to release that cash. So it's this trade-off for short-term, you know, just get me out of the short term. At what point do you say, do you hold your nerve? Isn't it? That is, it's
I mean,
tough.
it's and also well, you know about this more than anyone, given what you do, but forecasting will have completely changed, right? The advice I've seen is forecast like a reduction down to 24% revenue, 50% revenue, 100% expected, blah 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 blah, and then plan accordingly. And we see it in our world, the more startup-y world, people are being told, like, you need cash, hold cash, extend your runway, expect downside, right? Expect difficult times. And I imagine that retailers are having to position in exactly the same way. Any business should be. So if you're a cash-rich business, you can afford to hold your nerve, right? And I kind of agree in the fact that I think a lot of seasonality is a myth, and I think it's societally enforced, and I don't like it. I'm not going to go on Rob's like eco fast fashion's bad rant today, but like it's interesting to see big brands. I mentioned it last time. I think that like Gucci have come out saying that they're reducing the number of seasons they do, and this kind of thing. So I think yes, you can probably sell the same products a few months down the line, or at least enough of them. But there is a big if there, and it's if you've got the cash to do that and continue your normal business operations.
Yeah, so it's a trade-off, because if you over discount now, to a certain extent, you're just kicking that end goal down the road, right? Because
but not necessarily, right? So, fashion tends to be quite high margin, which is why they can discount so aggressively. And theoretically, I'm going to be told I'm wrong by my friends who are actually merchandisers and buyers and whatever. But like the theoretical argument, right, is that even if you sell out, you at least end up cash neutral, right? Mm-hmm. So you could just write the season off, start again. Now the issue there is that, like I said,
you need to sell at cost though for that to happen, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it limits growth. It limits any other capital expenditure that you've been thinking of doing, any kind of investment in operational efficiency, but like any marketing, any brand deals. These are the knock-on effects, because that whilst you kind of might go out cost neutral, this bit is funding everything else inside your business, right? And bleeding out into it. But
so assuming everything else is okay, and assuming that you can shift the stock at a break-even point or above break-even. So we're not talking about the margin of the cost that you buy the product in.
No, I'm talking about break-even for your business, right?
With everything else. Yeah. We'll probably get all sorts of people saying you're simplifying it too much, but it's about there's a theory to say that if you can shift, one of the reasons that people are doing this is because if you can shift at break even, above break even, you will survive.
Yeah, I think the issue though is likely that this season that we've missed subsidizes the rest of the year for a lot of businesses, and that's going to be the real issue. In that, if you assume all seasons are the same, and that like fall is this autumn. I don't know why I said fall. I've been reading too much American news. The autumn is the same as autumn, winter's the same as spring, summer, or whatever. Then yes, that argument stands up. But if one part of your year subsidizes the rest of your year, then you're likely in trouble, and you likely do need the cash. Is the other side of it. So I think it really is like, how cash rich is your business? Can you afford to make that bet? Because I think it's probably a sensible bet if you know your products well, if you know your market well. I don't have children. I've only been in that shop once. I did buy a pirate octopus. It was great. But I don't really have a feeling. You've probably got much more of a better feeling for how seasonal kids wear actually is than I do.
I think there's certainly seasons, but I think it's more related to, again, full disclosure, I don't do all that particular shopping in our household, right? So I do the food shopping.
You're a modern man.
I am. I do, so I do the food shopping, but I don't purchase the kids' clothes. But there's more, from what I've seen, it's more seasonal in terms of like thickness and weight of material and so forth. I mean, absolutely, there is seasons associated to style and fashion. That does exist.
But a lot of the stock, from my brief visit, I've only been in there once. John and Rach are very lucky.
I was going to say, because that's one of the more expensive. Jojo is one of the more expensive.
It's a very obvious baby shop in Guildford, so
path of least resistance for you. It's in, out,
yeah.
done, move on. I think probably before we get ourselves into a hole that we can't dig ourselves out of, in that
Let's move on.
we'll step out of. But I think it comes down to a few things. I mean, can we say that it's just a strategic decision to do it to encourage footfall or click throughs?
I think it is a spectrum of everything from strategic to desperation. Facebook shopping, which has gone live last couple of weeks, new release, better, happier. Well, maybe not happier given it's Facebook, but they did a poll, and it looks like a third of small businesses in the US will have closed due to Corona and unlikely to open back up.
Wow.
And those people will need cash, right? Because unfortunately, we're talking about stable as if the shop's going to exist, but the other side of it is there are going to be people who are just being liquidated, right? Their assets are being sold, and that could have the unfortunate event of leading into a price war as creditors just shift the stock at whatever price they can, right?
I mean, that's really, I hadn't even thought about that particular, you get into the sub-layer of why are people doing it. They're doing it strategically, then they're doing it to get cash, to get rid of excess stock, to just survive. But then I hadn't even looked at it from a point of view of actually, if you do have enough cash to survive, you're up against a period the next season where people are going into administration. What's your strategic play against those? Because the administrators just care about maximizing the amount of cash we can get out of the business for shareholders, or probably, again, not to get myself into trouble, their own pockets, because a lot of the time the administrators are expensive, right? So they're just, they've got a short period of time in which to realize that. So it's the knock-on effect, isn't it? There's a multitude of factors that you need to consider. Okay, so I think we probably got ourselves in a bit of trouble, but it's probably explored enough in that particular area in terms of why companies are discounting in the first place. So, shall we tackle? We've set the scene. Shall we attempt to tackle the question of this particular podcast of how can that might be nice, mightn't it? How can companies avoid heavy discounting? Because there was an article that I read from Forbes magazine, and the headline was, "Over discounting is not the solution for retail brands on the verge of COVID-19 bankruptcy."
Mm-hmm.
And they covered lots of different things as to why, what these retailers should explore. But from a BlackCurve perspective and pricing point of view, because that's what we fundamentally can control, how can companies avoid heavy discounting? And I mean, I think, which I think you probably do agree with, we're generally on the same page, is that if we refer back to Laura, as if I'm on first term basis with Laura, I've not met her or spoken to her, the CEO of Jojo Mama and Babe, when she says we're going to hold our nerve, I think I'm pretty confident that it's holding nerve, but using the data to help you hold that nerve. That's really what it's about.
I really hope so, because otherwise you're just taking a bet, right? Like, I think the key thing to say up front, we keep doing this, is the key word is heavy, right? We are not saying that you won't have to discount, because I think, given the market conditions for a lot of retailers, you will. So the real question, another way of asking the question, is how do I maximize margin or revenue or profitability through this period? Would you agree with that?
I like that summary. I think it's discounting is a given, and it's how you're avoiding the heavy part.
Because how I'd explain, so I think of stock management and pricing in terms of sell through, right? So you have a business objective to get to this stock by a given date, and the pricing is the lever that allows you to kind of either speed up or decrease how quickly your volume decreases. Right, you're changing the dial on your volume, and actually not just us, but we've got some competitors that do similar things and have worked with fashion retailers successfully to kind of optimize that process, because the traditional approach in a lot of industries is take 20% off, take 50% off, take 75% off. And actually you tend to sell out of key lines far too quickly in that approach, or people game you because they know it's going to be 70%. And actually, all the things that with little demand, you tend to shift right at the end when you probably could have made a bit more further on. So the way I'd rephrase what I hope, I can never say the store name, JJ Mama.
We should probably pick another example, because we'll have the legal team of.
What I'd say is that she's probably just extended her sell-through target, right? So from a pricing and stock management perspective, so if I add 2 months, then I don't have to decrease as heavily because I don't have to shift as much volume in a short period of time. And I think that is a very sensible approach and can be very data-driven, and you can adjust it accordingly. So, okay, right, well, we normally expect to sell out by July, August, but actually let's bounce to 3 months because of COVID, and treat it in that way and adjust prices accordingly. And then if that is the approach, I think that approach should pay off, and I hope it does. Because then, and you can also always turn the ratchet up sooner or later. There's no kind of harm in doing it. And if you, again, to go back to what we were saying earlier, if you have the luxury of time, so if you can afford to make that decision, and actually I'd argue it's how you should be managing your sales cycle anyway.
It's just, I see it as an extension. It's you're doing what you would do naturally over 12 months in a really short space of time. To a certain extent, the data of, I look at it a bit like Black Friday, right? I don't, or Cyber Monday. It works, but it only works if you do it effectively. Okay, so from my point of view, I absolutely believe that the right promotion can get footfall and can get click through. It excites. Okay, so it's almost like it's got to be a strategic decision at management level of which products do we feel excite and which products do we think we're going to be able to get the footfall and get the people into the stores. Okay, and if you can do that, then you get people through the door. But it should not be a blanket, everything must go sort of 70% off, because you do need to excite in this period of time. Okay, but then it is about everything else. It's about avoiding this heavy discounting process.
But if we step back a bit, I think the real key part about it is just understanding your own portfolio, your own inventory, right? Because there are certain, if you think in, I think online fashion is probably a good example. If you discount, I've just bought shirts from Uniqlo, so that's what's in my brain. So I'm going to use that as an example. But like, I tend to buy a batch of linen shirts every summer without fail. Turns out I still have this summer, right? And I imagine that's a fairly consistent behavioural pattern. Because I now need to look good on all the podcasts that we're doing. But
and it's a mighty fine shirt there, Rob, as well, if I don't say so.
But also it's because they're just light and easy. I know they fit. It's a good cut, and that's not. I don't think that behavioural pattern is going to change for me and for a lot of consumers. So there's no point discounting heavily on those shirts because that demand's pretty stable. Something like swimwear, on the other hand, I mean, you're going to have to. It's going to be hard to convince me to buy swimwear right now, for the same reason. So really, if you were to give a discount across a whole of a range, summer range, I don't know. This is really broad brushstrokes. Again, we're going to get in trouble with the merchandisers out there, but it's a thought experiment, right? You'd be hammering one product at the expense just to shift another. So not only do you want to be tactical with your discounting, you want to make sure that you actually should be discounting at all, right? Because I'm sure there are products that you can probably increase price on.
Very much so. I think it is working out. You've got to make sure in the data that you flagged the appropriate products for the types of seasons and what's the typical duration and what are the data points that dictate the sell of this particular product, right? And if it's weather related, if it's people going on holiday, then clearly that's not happening. Okay, so therefore you need to probably do discount those products if you want any chance of releasing cash, if you have to release cash from those products. But then everything else, it's again, you might need, because our purses and our wallets are tighter, you know, we might not be able to have the spending power as individuals that we had previously. But not everybody. Some sectors out there are doing really well, and people do still have money to spend, and people do still need that toaster or that Hoover or that oven or whatever it might be. So it's about managing that that trade off and not over discounting.
But if I were to actually answer the question, I think the key if we put promotions and excitement and footfall aside, if I were managing this online, it would be to work out when your sell-through date is, and then make very small adjustments in price. So and listen to the response of the market to make sure that you hit that date, and that should tell you the difference between whether you need to discount between 65% or 63%, right? And maybe even smaller if it's a high enough frequency selling product, and that means that you can really maximize the money you're making on each item through that situation.
So it's the call and response. So I do listen to what you say, Rob. If for those, episode 1 is what you need to listen to hear about that particular nugget. So it's avoiding these heavy step changes, heavy reductions, exactly. And it's sort of smoothing that out. Because as you say, it might be to get that, to release that extra cash, all you need to do is drop a few percentage points. Whereas if you have a strategic mission of let's slash everything by 30% and see what happens, okay, fine, you might kick the can down the road and you will still survive because you've managed to sell everything. But if you could have achieved a higher margin and sold out, then you'd be kicking yourself, right? Absolutely kicking yourself.
I'd argue that a lot of people don't realise that selling out too quickly is bad. Oh, I sold it all, great. I think that's key, because that is the real. We've talked about this at the other side of this in the webinar, interestingly, but it's exactly the same effect. You run the risk of just shifting your stock far too cheaply, because it might be that you're just slightly mispriced, right? Do you know that you discount by 50% and everyone's like, oh, happy days, especially in a non-fashion world, actually, because there could be a competitor out there you don't know about or whatever, or something that triggers, and suddenly you're now selling 30% under what you could have sold out for.
I mean, I think I would encourage the pricing managers, the pricing analysts, e-commerce directors, commercial directors, I'll stop naming titles, whoever's responsible for managing pricing in an organization, you know, if what we're saying is not necessarily hitting home, think of it in another way of, to a certain extent, you're managing hotel rooms, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. You don't want somebody to buy that hotel room too cheaply, okay? Because you've got a finite number of hotel rooms. That is exactly the same situation that you're in, okay? You've got a finite number of stock. You want to sell it for the highest price possible. You will kick yourself. We hate it. You know, we love, as consumers, we love a bargain, but the e-commerce directors hate a bargain if they could have given a higher bargain to the end consumer, right? And so you don't want to be in that position. So what kind of data should these e-commerce companies and retailers be looking at in order to manage that sell-through cycle? Are there particular data sets that stand out?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, really. You need your stock, unsurprisingly. You need a date from the business or whatever, and you need some indication of volume. because all you're doing is, and in fact, you don't even need that. You could do it just off stock data, because you can look at the change in stock data day on day or week on week, and then adjust the price accordingly and see if that changes.
So
So
put the gas
realistically,
on, have a
you literally
let it
foot
coast,
down,
put
foot
the
off, and
gas on,
have
let it coast, and then you can actually then rein it back. I think one thing that I always try and encourage is that just because you've gone down on a discounting cycle, if suddenly you realise that you can stop. You don't have to keep going because you feel that on this date I'm going to go. It's my black plan and everything's going to be super discounted. If it's selling well at a higher plan, keep it. And also if it's selling well, have the confidence to use the data to maybe increase the price. Now there's a maverick.
Yeah, but increasing the price is tricky, right? If it's been flagged as it depends how it's been
within your marketing channels and branding,
yeah.
but assuming that you're within those boundaries, because you don't necessarily need to put it in your pool of on your particular section of your website that it is a discount, right? You can just manage it as a normal product. It can be a lower price.
If you have a sales cycle, you should be doing this on all your products all the time. This isn't just a shifting stock thing. This is just like, how do you optimize the machinery of your business to sell out at the right rate and make the most money that you can for it?
And does competitor data come into this at all?
Not really. It does from a secondary understanding piece. Because what you might find is that actually you've been trying to manage your sell through and you drop the price 1% and then suddenly it rockets, right? Suddenly you're shifting boxes. And that's usually because you'll have tripped under a competitor in the marketplace. It's the traditional one. You suddenly become the cheapest player, right? Or things line up and you get the buy box on Google or whatever, right? And suddenly you come into range of their algorithms. And so from an understanding piece, it can be useful, but you can't, if you're using just competitor data, you can't do this realistically. It doesn't, well, that's not strictly true. You will do this accidentally if your competitors are doing it and you're following their prices. But,
so if they've set up a fantastic algorithm to do sell through, you can just follow them and then you'll optimize as well. But no, I mean, we're a firm believer of being a master of your own destiny, and you can't rely on your competitors to have they're scratching their heads just as much as you of how do I get cash back into my business, right? So it is your sales history, your stock levels, and making sure that you
honestly,
have
it's really just your stock levels that are key. Actually, you can do it without the sales history. Really counts because you can't measure profit. You kind of can, but it's harder to measure profitability. You'll be doing it just on volume, and then you're kind of finding the price that fits that sells the volume out by the right time, but may not maximize profitability. Yeah, it's a bit of a nuanced thing, but so you can do it with just stock. Sales history helps from a kind of second level of optimization, and then the competitor data and other data sources, click-through rates, web traffic, whatever, really are explanatory rather than actually acting on it.
And what about if I've got products? So we're saying just looking at stock levels, but what about if I've got products that in a normal world I wouldn't sell that many of, right? They're in my long tail, okay, but I'm still holding on to them. They might not have sold as much as I would have done in a normal environment, but I still need to shift them. But I haven't got enough data to know if I drop the price and nothing happens, but that could be normal, right? So what do I do? Do I just keep going until it shifts?
Well, you need to bounce. You need to revert. Really, there's two reasons for your long tail. One is price driven, and everything else isn't. So there's either lack of demand, and you can control price through price, obviously, but you can't really control the lack of demand through price, right? Lack of any other factor in demand through price. So that could be visibility. That could be what's your Google ad spend on the product? How much of a market is there anyway? Is it a low demand item? If you discount a bit and it doesn't shift, put the price back because otherwise you're try increasing it. see if it changes, right? Because it could just be a low demand item in general. People are buying once every 6 months. Maybe you can make an extra 10% on it, and actually change the price won't make any difference at all.
And I suppose also, by the very nature of being a long tail, you're probably not going to have as much stock of it anyway, and it's not going to massively turn the needle anyway. So it's this whole managing the discounting approach is primarily towards your core products. Is that?
I think so. Realistically, you've got to be kind of selling enough for it to make sense. Yeah, and also just, I think, to go back to what we were talking about at the start, your business risk is more likely to be tied up with your core products as well. I'd certainly hope it is. If that makes sense, in that you probably have more capital invested there that you need to release if you need to release it, and you stand to make more money off smaller optimizations there, just because the volume of the products you're selling is much higher. So if you're selling something once every 6 months versus once a week, and you at the same price, you make 1% on one of them, you're going to make more on the weekly one versus the 6 monthly one, right?
Absolutely. So is there anything else, Rob, that you wanted to touch upon, or have I grilled you enough this afternoon?
No, I think we're good. Really, I think it's just really, I think it's often a missing piece, certainly in our world, in pricing, in terms of what people do, and actually can see serious uptick. I mean, I'd almost say if you can get away with not making the third cut, just see that. Even if you don't want to do an automated solution or whatever, just test seeing what happens if you don't drop it to 70%, drop it to 40 or whatever.
And maybe if you said that your cycle was going to be every 4 weeks, hold that cycle for 5 weeks and see.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. Yeah.
So there's many ways to do it, and the shameful plug is if you are still scratching your head and wondering how to manage it, BlackCurve does offer pricing decision software, so we can help you maintain your sell through and avoid discounting. So I think we've covered a lot of ground there. I think it's clear that retailers, both bricks and mortar and online only, are setting themselves up and bracing for a period of discounting. And just to echo what Rob said, I like the summary. Really, the retailers and e-commerce companies that are going to come out on top are those that avoid the heavy discounting part. Okay, I think we're all going to accept that discounting is going to happen, and as our wallets and our purses have been tightened, and as we kick the can down the road from consumers to make those non-essential purchases. But I feel we are starting to ease out of this lockdown, and people are now actually started thinking, well, do you know what? I did postpone that purchase, and I am gonna buy X, Y, and Z. So personally speaking, I'm being positive about what's about to happen. But hey ho, I wouldn't be in the position if I was all doom and gloom that I'm in, right? So I think it's really for what as an e-commerce company and as a retail owner or decision maker, you've got to avoid the heavy discounting. And the key data set that can help you do that is you're looking closely at your stock levels and monitoring how that turns on every day as you go through this discounting period. And if you can hold that period for longer, so if you are going to do this step change, hold it for 5 weeks instead of 4 weeks. Hold it for 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks. Or as Rob said, don't do the last one. Okay, because sometimes you'll be surprised that just having that little extra will make sure that you can hold that higher margin for a longer period of time. And us as BlackCurve also, we generally we've got curve in the title, right, for a reason. We don't like step changes in data. So if you can just nudge it slightly, ask the market, is this increasing demand? Is this increasing sell-through? Nudge it a bit more. Does it increase sell-through further? By changing prices by those little increments, those little percentage points, again, you might be surprised that actually you achieve the same end goal of selling out, but at a higher margin. And cash is king. You're going to get probably a lot of the retailers out there are going to earn slightly less money in this period than they would have otherwise. But if you can come out on top with more cash and avoid that heavy discounting, ultimately you'll have enough in the pot to hit the ground running when the next season takes place. Rob, do you think that's a good enough summary for today?
Yeah, I like it. And if you work in the retail world and think we've been talking nonsense for the last hour, please let us know.
Absolutely. Both positive and negative comments are very welcome. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's not sunny this time, but so instead, I will wish you a fantastic week, year ahead, and remember, make sure, avoid heavy discounting. Incremental discounting is the way forward. Thank you very much.